Bienvenidos a nuestra tercera mesa internacional en este segundo triple encuentro histórico de Derecho Ambiental, en el cual se unió FIDA, el Foro Internacional de Derecho Ambiental, EIDA, el Encuentro Internacional de Derecho Ambiental, y COPLADA, el Congreso Planetario de Derecho Ambiental. Muchas gracias por seguir con nuestra transmisión, muchas gracias por compartir su tiempo con nosotros. Welcome once again to the third international table of this second tribal encounter of environmental law, where FIDA, the International Forum of International Environmental Law, EIDA, the Encounter of International Environmental Law, and COPLADA, the International Planetarium Congress of Environmental Law, we have in our third table this day, second day of this encounter of experts and guest speakers worldwide to just get aware of what is going on around the world about environmental crisis and all about environmental law. Today, we have a wonderful table about indigenous people and climate justice. And for this, we have an expert in this theme. We have with us RITURAJ PHUKAN here with us. Hi, RITURAJ, how are you?
I'm good, thank you, Carrie. How are you? Thank you for having me here.
It's an honor to have you here with us. Thank you for being here. I will introduce you to the audience. RITURAJ PHUKAN is an environmental writer, adventurer, and naturalist based out of Assam, a biodiversity-rich, climate change-impacted province in the northeast of India. He is the founder of the Indigenous Peoples Climate Justice Forum, and also serves as the vice president of the US-based Grassroots Coalition for Environmental and Economic Justice. He is a member of the International Union for Conservation of Nature and sits on the board of civil society groups in the Americas, Europe, and Australia. RITURAJ has personally experienced the impact of climate change in the polar frontiers of the Arctic and Antarctic, in the Himalayas, and across India, having worked extensively at the grassroots. He says, water is the local issue of global climate change for people and for biodiversity. He is driven by concerns over glacial loss in the water towers of Asia, and he is currently working on an initiative to mobilize civil society action in the countries of the Himalayan region. As the National Coordinator for Biodiversity for the Climate Reality Project INAM, Chief Operating Officer for WAP for Water, and Secretary General of Green Guard Nature Organization, he facilitates awareness and action on the 3 W's: warming, water, and wildlife, working with all stakeholders, including indigenous communities, students, civil society, business, and media, for a positive social impact. RITURAJ was personally trained as a climate reality leader by Nobel laureate Al Gore and was featured in the former US Vice President's 2017 book, An Inconvenient Sequel, Truth to Power. He authored the chapter Biodiversity in a Warming World in the Amazon #1 bestseller, Climate Abandoned, a book launched in the USA on Earth Day 2019. Wow, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you so much for giving us your expertise. Thank you so much for letting us learn from you, from your wisdom and what you experience and what you literally every single day you develop yourself to aware others of what is going on with this climate justice and these indigenous people that we sometimes think that we know, but we don't know nothing about it. So I thank God for your life. Thank you, Rita, for being with us right now here in this moment at this time.
Thank you.
Listen, I have maybe it's some question that a lot of people know, but I don't. So what Indigenous stands for?
First of all, thank you for that splendid and detailed introduction. And I'm going to share my screen because, Carrie, to understand indigenous people's rights and climate justice and how climate change is affecting these communities, I think we need to have an in-depth understanding of what is happening. Just let me know if you can see my screen, so I'll have a short presentation, and then I think we can take the questions. You can see my screen?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. So I have named this presentation as Indigenous People and Climate Change, keeping with the theme of this table. And in the last 3 or 4 months, I have decided to start all of my presentations with a very brief weather report. As we all know about the IPCC report, the latest IPCC update, which unequivocally blamed human beings for the warming that we are experiencing. And then we had this July 2021 termed as the hottest month ever recorded. Now, something that happened in Canada, Lytton, which had 49.6 degrees Celsius, which is a new all-time Canadian heat record, very much is in tune with the theme of today's presentation, Indigenous people. The community which was resident at Lytton was a native indigenous community, and the entire town was wiped out by a wildfire following this heat wave. So I thought I'll just put it here. Now, a little bit about where I come from. I live in Assam, which is in the northeast of India, and that is a very green and biodiversity rich part of the country, which is famous for the one-horned rhinoceros. And I put it here because many people think that rhinos are only found in Africa, but they are also found in some countries of Asia. And Assam, where I live, is the main habitat for the greater one-horned rhinoceros. So I grew up in a period of civil unrest, a student-led movement against influx of foreigners. So basically, this was a kind of clash between indigenous local communities and those who were perceived to be outsiders. And I grew up thinking, why would people want to come into a different region from where they were born and cause troubles? And I found my answer many, many years later when I went on this expedition to Antarctica. And there I saw the remains of the Larsen B ice shelf 11 years after the ice shelf actually broke away. And that made me a climate activist. And because I connected warming and the loss of
Se trabó un poco la imagen.
Okay, so Rituraj, are you there? I think you were cut off from internet.
first act of climate activism was from Antarctica, and that was in solidarity with the indigenous communities of the 15 Pacific nations. This was the Pacific Warriors Day of Action on March the 2nd, 2013, and my first act of climate activism was in solidarity with these indigenous people and from Antarctica. Now, where I come from is a place known for floods. We have intense floods throughout the year. In some years, it is more, in some years it is less. The frequency and intensity has been increasing in the past few years. People are displaced, and these are very recent pictures, as you can see. But it is also a place where local communities, indigenous people have shown resilience. They have learned to harvest and cultivate food crops, even in flood inundated areas. They have learned to live in stilt houses and survive the floods. But as the frequency and intensity has been increasing, they are still finding a lot of more and more difficulties, and survival struggles are there. Now, this is how people still live, and I think it might be difficult for people in the global north to understand that here in many parts of India and Africa and the developing world, people still live very primitive lives, and they are happy. You can see them smiling despite all these problems. But there are stories of deprivation. There are lifelong aspirations that are pushed aside children do not go to school, there are health and sanitation issues, and all these people mostly are indigenous communities and local people who are suffering the most. Another factor that is rarely talked about is human-wildlife conflicts, and that is a very big issue where I live. Uh, Elephant herds and people are competing for scant natural resources. And one of the factors that is blamed is, of course, climate change, uh, increased temperatures and rainfall pattern changes have uh, led to the proliferation of invasive creepers and shrubs across this elephant habitat where there used to be grass, and now you see all this uneatable stuff, and then there is more and more conflict as the elephants come down into crop fields, they destroy houses and granaries, and people suffer. So this is also a consequence of climate change that is hardly ever talked about. Now, I want to quickly touch upon this Hindu Kush Himalaya assessment report. This Hindu Kush Himalaya is known as the third pole because this region has some of the highest mountains in the world. It has the most amount of ice outside of the polar regions, and about 40% of human beings live in some of the most populated countries, and they are dependent on the Hindu Kush Himalayas for their water supply. China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all these densely populated countries are around the Hindu Kush Himalaya region. This is also one of the most fastest warming regions in the world, with a lot of changes in the vegetation, a lot of impacts on the glaciers, which are melting faster, and a lot of impact on biodiversity as well. This is, of course, the Eastern Himalayas. My part, Assam, is also within this region. This is currently one of the biodiversity rich, water abundant regions, but in the future, it is projected to be one of those areas which is likely to see water wars. This is also inhabited by at least 1,000 different indigenous peoples and local communities who are all feeling the brunt of climate change impacts. Now, I did a few blogs, and I thought I will quote from them. This was, of course, on Indigenous Peoples Day on the 9th of August. And this was published in Medium, and the title was Need for the Indigenous and Climate Justice Conversation. I think it's very much in tune with what we are talking about today. So coming back to your question, Carrie, who are the indigenous people, or what are indigenous? Well, basically, they are the native settlers, and they make up less than 5% of the global population, but that is about 370 million in numerical terms, right?
Wow, 5% only? Like
yes,
5%? Okay.
Yes, exactly. And you can find indigenous peoples and local communities in all the continents except Antarctica, right? They survive on some of the harshest environments on the planet, from the Arctic to the Amazon to the Himalayan mountains, Tibet. They inhabit ecosystems which are most susceptible to climate change. In the Arctic, communities which have been hunting walruses, seals, reindeer, even polar bears for a long, long time now are feeling the impact of climate change. For example, the Sami community in Europe, and 2 years back, I traveled across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark to see how the Sami are being impacted by climate change, and I think a lot of these have not been documented. Their voice also has to be heard. Similar is the case with Amazon, of course. Nowhere are the indigenous people more threatened than in the Amazon, especially in Brazil, where indigenous land is being invaded by miners and loggers, and exploitation is rampant. So indigenous communities across Africa, Australia, Asia are having a lot of struggles, and besides their daily struggles, they have to deal with climate change now. Yet their voices are not heard. In India, there are over 700 nationally recognized indigenous communities, 700. So that's quite a lot. Many of them are prone to impacts from melting of glaciers or floods across northern plains. Then in other areas, deforestation is causing problems. They're also feeling the water crisis in many parts, and the coastal communities are seeing more and more of extreme weather impacts like storms and flood surges as well. So, benefits of indigenous knowledge and traditional uh, systems are more and more recognized by the global community now, and we will probably be seeing more and more of these in global climate change negotiations, starting with COP26 as well. When you talk about biodiversity, we'll quickly look at how important they are. In 2019, the Global Assessment Report on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, published by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. The IPBS is like the IPCC. And they have said that about 70% of the world's remaining natural areas are in the control of indigenous peoples, and therefore it is very vital. The future of carbon sequestration, the future of mitigating climate change, as well as to stop the biodiversity crisis, depends on indigenous peoples and local communities, which are now known as IPLCs.
Rituraj, let me ask you something there. You told me, just to check, that indigenous people, they're the 5% of the world population, and they manage the 70% of the earth.
Yes. Yes, 70% of the remaining natural areas, the terrestrial and domesticated, the biodiversity areas, the protected areas, as you say, right?
Yep.
So if you look at the Amazon, most of the communities that inhabit the vast 8 countries of Amazon is mostly indigenous peoples and local communities. Similarly, if you go to Africa, the forested areas, the mountains, the hills, the riparian areas are inhabited by indigenous peoples and local communities. If you come to India, across the Himalayas, in the coastal areas, across riparian areas, you will find indigenous people are the ones who live near the forests, who live near the wetlands and rivers, who are basically controlling these natural areas. So the last remaining protected areas of the earth, the natural areas, about 70% are actually controlled by, managed, owned, or used, or occupied by indigenous people and local communities.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And therefore, the IPBES assessment concluded that indigenous people and local communities are key for biodiversity conservation. And therefore, we are seeing more recognition for the fact that even for carbon sequestration and climate change solutions, nature-based solutions, indigenous communities are the key. This is what we are going to see at COP26. People are already feeling the impacts of climate change, and most of them are actually indigenous people and local communities. So one of the goals during this COP26 is adapt to protect communities and natural habitats. And these include protection and restoration of ecosystems. And who can do it? Because 70% is controlled, managed, or owned by indigenous people and local communities. It is these communities who have to do the hard work, who have to be in the forefront of all policy decisions to protect and restore these ecosystems, right? Similarly, to build nature-based solutions, defenses, warning systems, and increase resilience, these communities are very, very vital. So more and more, we are seeing that indigenous knowledge and traditional systems are coming more and more into focus when we talk about food security, we talk about securing livelihoods, we talk about saving lives. I think we'll see more and more conversation around indigenous people, around climate justice, and resilience development of these communities.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
What is the difference between native people and indigenous people?
Well, it is just a term. I think indigenous would be the more appropriate term now, because in many parts of the world, some communities move from one place to another, or they have moved in the past, and but they have been occupying a certain area for a long time, maybe hundreds of years or even thousands of years. So they will definitely be indigenous, but they may not be native, right? But they are very loosely diverse terms, but very much connected. And I think it is correct to use native or a tribal community or ethnic tribes, but I think the most acceptable broad-based term is indigenous.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is just a bit of what I'm doing to ensure that the indigenous peoples, the voice of the global south, climate justice, these are conversations that are featured in the upcoming COP26. I have had some coverage by The Guardian, by the BBC, and the Friends of the Earth Scotland churches as well. Now, I thought this is a nice cartoon that we should include here. It is so much relevant to the theme of today's table. Did you know that indigenous knowledge could help governments and organizations combat climate change better? And
No.
that is representative of the indigenous people. And yeah, no, really, why has nobody ever brought this up on our webinars before? That's a question of the corporates or the negotiators.
Right.
And
yeah.
we have one man. We have one man, Mr. Jada Payang, who is with us today. And I think he represents one of the brilliant voices of the indigenous people, the local communities around the world. He has shown what one man can do, if he has the determination. He is known as the forest man of India, my good friend, Mr. Jada Payang. Apuni camera to on kori pare. So I will welcome him here, and let me just give you a brief of what he has done.
Yes, please.
He was planting trees. He was planting saplings on a barren sandbar in the middle of the Brahmaputra for about 30 years without anybody knowing about it. And
Wow.
after 30 years, he was discovered, and they found this brilliant man-made forest which harbors elephants and rhinos and tigers and deer and hundreds of birds. And for the last 10 years, he has been motivating people, especially students, to plant saplings to earn their own oxygen on the planet. He is a brilliant motivator. He has won India's fourth highest honor, the Padma Shri, and I'm so thankful for him to be to have agreed to be here today. I'll ask him to switch on his camera. Munmuni, tumi huni asa jodi camera on kori diba. And there he is. I will end my slide with the knowledge that we are only trying to save ourselves. It's the future of human beings which is at stake. The world will always be there even if humans are gone, and the earth can take care of itself. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. And let's hear Mr. Jada Payang now.
Thank you, RITURAJ. That was amazing. Thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise. And I am learning a lot. Hello, Dadav.
Namaste, namaste.
Mr. Dadav, hello.
Yes. Namaste, namaste.
Thank you. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you so much for being here with us. May God bless you. RITURAJ can translate the Vietnamese language.
Yeah, so আপোনাক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছে আপুনি ইয়াতে অহাৰ কাৰণে আৰু মই অকমান সৰুকে থুলমূলকে কৈ দিছো
Aye.
So, Kerry, would you like to ask him any question or should I ask him?
Yes, I would like to say, please, thank you that I am honored that he said yes to this, that I am honored by your presence, Rituraj, also, and your friendship and everything for bringing this prestige, Mr. Jadak, here for us. Mr. Jadak, thank you. I am honored, and I want to ask you, why are you called the forest man?
মোলা এটা প্ৰথমতে তেখেতে আপোনাক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছে আপুনি ইয়াতে ইমান দেৰিকে ৰাতি ইয়াতে আহি পেলাই পাৰ্টিচিপেট কৰিছে এখন দক্ষিণ আমেৰিকাত চলি আছে আৰ্জেণ্টিনা মেক্সিকো তাৰপিছত পেৰু আৰু বহুত জেগাত গৈ আছে আপোনাক প্ৰশ্ন এটা সুধিছে যে আপুনি নিজৰ শব্দৰে ক'ব পাৰিব নেকি আপোনাক কিয় বা কেনেকৈ ফৰেষ্ট মেন বুলি স্বীকৃতি দিছে বিশ্ববাসীয়ে
বিশ্ববাসীয়ে ফৰেষ্ট মেন বুলি অন্য মানক দিছে মই হাবি জংঘল জীৱ জন্তু চৰাই চিৰিকটি পানীৰ লগত সম্বন্ধ ৰাখি যি কাম কৰিছো সেইকাৰণে ফৰেষ্ট মেন অফ ইণ্ডিয়া সন্মান দিছে আৰু যিহেতু ৱাইল্ড এনিমেল যিবোৰ থাকিব লাগে ভাৰতবৰ্ষত সেইবোৰ আছে সেইকাৰণে মোক সেই সন্মানটো চাইণ্টিষ্টসকলে দিয়া জৱাহৰলাল নেহৰু ইউনিভাৰ্চিটি এনভাইৰনমেণ্টেল চাইণ্টিষ্টসকলে দিয়া সেইকাৰণে মই জৱাহৰলাল নেহৰু ইউনিভাৰ্চিটিৰ পৰা যিটো সন্মান পাইছিলো আজি পৃথিৱীয়ে সেইকাৰণে সকলোৱে ফৰেষ্টমেন বুলি জনা যায়
So he says because of his work, because of his continuous engagement with wildlife, with the forest, with nature, the people of India have honored him with the forestman title, and he was actually given that coveted title by the Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is one of India's leading educational institutions, on Earth Day 2012. So since then he has been known as the forest man of India. Yeah.
I know this is a very weird question, but I want his wisdom from Mr. Dada to answer this question. Why is a tree important for human being?
Carrie, can you please repeat that question? I could not get you.
Yes. Why is a tree, why planting a tree, taking care of a tree is important for one human being?
Oh, it's একদম আপোনাক আপুনি ভাল পোৱা প্ৰশ্ন সুধিলে তেখেতে যে এজোপা গছ ৰোপণ কৰি পেলাই প্ৰতিপালন কৰাটো কিহৰ কাৰণে মানুহৰ কাৰণে অতি গুৰুত্বপূৰ্ণ বুলি ভাবে আপুনি
নাই সেইকাৰণে সৰু অৱস্থাত এজোপা গছ পুলি ৰুই 5 বছৰ ডাঙৰ দীঘল কৰি অক্সিজেন যিটো পাব লাগে গছে দিয়ে সেইকাৰণে গছৰ অবিনে অক্সিজেনটো আনে দিব নোৱাৰে সেইকাৰণে মই গছ গছনি ভাল পোৱা চৰাই চিৰিকটি ভাল পোৱা জীৱ জন্তু ভাল পোৱা সৰু অৱস্থাৰ পৰা সেইটো কৰিছিলো কাৰণ বিজ্ঞানীৰ লগত ডাঙৰ হোৱাৰ কাৰণে আজি হয়তো সেই গছ গছনিৰ ওপৰত মোৰ বেছি গুৰুত্ব আছে
So it is very important that everybody takes at least the initial 5 years of their life to plant a sapling and nurture it to grow and earn their own oxygen on earth. We know that the trees give us the oxygen that we breathe. Nobody else can give that to us. So if each person is made to understand that by practically growing its own sapling and nurturing it to a tree, then I think it will be, he thinks it will be the world will be a better place, and that his engagement with nature has made him, nature has endowed him with this title of Forest Man of India. That is his belief.
Thank you for answering the question. My other question is, what about your community, your indigenous community? What is your indigenous community fighting for right now?
Etu আপনার যোনটো জনজাতি আপনার খিলঞ্জীয়া আপনি যোনটো খিলঞ্জীয়া জনজাতি হয় মিচিং জনজাতিৰ এতিয়া বৰ্তমানে আপোনালোকৰ কেনেকুৱা ধৰণৰ প্ৰকৃতিৰ লগত আপোনালোকে থাকে আৰু কি ধৰণৰ সংকট আপোনালোকে দেখা পাইছে জলবায়ু পৰিৱৰ্তনৰ কাৰণে হওক বা জৈৱ বৈচিত্ৰতা হেৰাই যোৱাৰ কাৰণে
মিচিং জনগোষ্ঠীত আমি নদ নদীত গছ-গছনিত চৰাই-চিৰিকটি জীৱ-জন্তুত অতীতৰ পৰা নদীমাতৃক দেশত থাকো আশে-পাশে থাকো আৰু মিচিং জনগোষ্ঠীৰ মানুহে জলবায়ু পৰিৱৰ্তন ফলত পানীৰ অভাৱ হৈছিল সেই পানীৰ অভাৱটো দূৰ কৰিবৰ কাৰণে যিমান মিচিং জনগোষ্ঠীৰ মানুহ আছে তেওঁলোকে নিজে সেই জাতিটোৱে আমি যিটো মিচিং জাতি তেওঁলোকে তিনিটা বস্তু বজাৰৰ পালে সেইটো হ'ল নিমখ জুই চলা আৰু কেৰাচিন আৰু বাকিবোৰ প্ৰকৃতিৰ পৰাই পাওঁ সেইকাৰণে আমাৰ মিচিং জনগোষ্ঠীৰ যিটো ৰাইচ বিয়েৰ বনায় এটা আয়ুৰ্বেদিক ঔষধে ভৰা আৰু সেইটো আমি জন্মৰ পৰা মৃত্যুলৈকে সেইটো ইউজ কৰে আৰু সেইটো ইউজ কৰাৰ কাৰণে আমাৰ মিচিং জনগোষ্ঠীৰ মানুহৰ কেঞ্চাৰ ৰোগটো কম
Okay, this is a very interesting answer, Carrie. He belongs to the tribe known as Missing. So the Missing community is a riparian community who lives on the river or by the river bank, and they are very much connected to the biodiversity of the river and the biodiversity around them. And in fact, their lives are intertwined with the river in many ways. And they are totally dependent on nature. They only buy 3 commodities from the market. That is salt, the matchbox, and oil. They do not need to buy anything else because they grow or find it, collect it from nature itself, from the forest around them. And they are also very fond of making and consuming rice beer, which is a traditional drink which requires about 101 types of vegetation, roots, shoots, leaves, bark of trees. And each community by themselves, they maintain a small forest where they can collect all these 101 types of vegetation to make their favorite rice beer. So by nature, they are not only close to the river, but they are also biodiversity protectors because that particular 101 types of plants in a particular area, it supports a variety of other life forms as well. So by nature, they are very close to nature, but now they're feeling on one hand, they're seeing more and more floods, and on the other hand, they're also seeing water scarcity due to climate change impacts in certain seasons.
Okay, so if he would ask a politician or an environmental policy, he will ask an environmental policy to protect the nature and not for their community as humans, like a home or like a car or something like that. He will have to protect the earth and to protect the nature that he is living for because the nature gives everything that he needs to eat, to shelter, to just have a good life. That's my question. If he had a politician in front of him, like the president of India or like the president of the United Nations or the president of any country, what environmental policy will he ask that politician?
So তেখেতে কৈছে যে আপোনাৰ কথাখিনি শুনি এনেকুৱা একদম তেখেত নিশ্চিত যে আপোনাৰ সন্মুখত যদি কোনোবা এজন ৰাজনীতিবিদ আনা হয় ৰাষ্ট্ৰপতিয়ে হওক বা খুব ডাঙৰ এজন প্ৰধানমন্ত্ৰীয়ে হওক বা কোনোবা ডাঙৰ তেনেকুৱা নেতা হওক তেতিয়াহ'লে হয়তো আপুনি তেখেতে আপোনাক কি লাগে বুলি ক'লে আপোনাক হয়তো সুধিলে আপুনি তেওঁলোকক চাগে ক'ব যে আমাৰ প্ৰকৃতিখনে সুন্দৰ কৰি দিয়ক কিন্তু বেলেগ মানুহে হয়তো গাড়ী বিচাৰিব পাৰে বা কিবা তেনেকুৱা বিচাৰিব পাৰে আপোনাৰ কথাৰ পৰা তেখেতে শুনিব বিচাৰিছে যে আপুনি কি বিচাৰিছে I think we have lost him, Carrie.
Oh, okay.
I think
okay.
Yeah, unstable connection.
It's okay. It's okay. I mean, my question was like that because like it's amazing that his humility, his Okay, Mr. Jadav, are you there? Thank you for joining us again. Ritura, can you translate that? Thank you for being such a gentle that he's back again.
Mulaida, আপুনি আছে নেকি? হ'ব দিয়ক, আপোনাৰ 10টা বাজিলে, আপোনাৰ ধন্যবাদ জনাইছে আৰু আপোনাৰ উত্তৰটো এনেও বুজি পালে যে আপুনি প্ৰকৃতি সুৰক্ষাটোৱে বিচাৰিব, হেতু কাৰণে আপোনাক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছে আৰু ইয়াতে আহি পেলাই এখন মঞ্চত আপুনি উপস্থিত থাকাৰ কাৰণে সকলো ৰাইজৰ পৰা এই বিশ্ববাসীৰ ফালৰ পৰা আপোনাক ধন্যবাদ জনাব বিচাৰিছে তেখেতে। So he also conveys his thanks to you for having him here, and he looks forward to an opportunity to meet you again on another forum in the future. I think he got disconnected again.
Okay, it's okay. Just reiterate. I mean, it's amazing how he has that heart, you know, that heart from the Indigenous community, that heart that knows that nature gives them everything to live and gives them everything to just breathe and know that life is there, and water and food and shelter. And he is so calm, you know, like he's so calm. When he speaks, when he waits, I think that this 5%, you know, of the Indigenous community everywhere, like in the world, taking care of the 70% of the earth that is not damaged, it's one of the things that we need to pay attention to. We are having our voices and votes everywhere, and I know that, but I always say the same thing. We need to take action, you know, like you and I, like climate reality leaders, we are always trying to take action in what we do, trying to not just like take our voices to speaker to volume, but take action on it. So my question to you, Rituraj, is like, how and why and what can we do to take action for this Indigenous community around the world, to just help them or just be wise in what we are doing for them?
Yeah, thank you. I think, Carrie, that's such an important question. I feel that the global north, the developed countries, really do not have any idea about how people still live in these remote areas where indigenous peoples and local communities are struggling to survive, even otherwise to earn their 3 meals a day. But because of climate change impacts, whether it's a storm or it's a landslide or it's a change in vegetation, their entire lifestyles, their cultures, I believe their traditional cultures are intertwined with the biodiversity around them. So all these challenges are hitting them so hard, and people do not even know about it. They have not contributed anything to the greenhouse emissions. I would say the contribution of indigenous communities would be zero or very close to zero, right? But they are feeling the worst effects, but they do not have the voice at global climate change negotiations. They are not in charge of their future. If the remote communities in Himalayas or deep inside the Amazon, they have no voice at global climate change negotiations. I think it is high time that disparities between the developed world and the developing communities, between human beings, these are human beings, they may be living dressed only in leaves in the middle of the jungle, or living in houses built out of bamboo, but they are human beings just like anybody who is living in New York or Paris, right? So they should have equal opportunities, equal rights, equal access to information, equal access to improve their livelihoods, to provide education for their children. But where is that? These development aspirations are lost in their daily struggle to survive, to protect what remains of their livelihoods. And these are threatened, their very existence is threatened by climate change. I think the most important factor, the point here, is to provide a voice to the indigenous people of the world and demand that any conversation of climate justice should be centered on the people who are feeling it most. We should not divert climate finance to help companies which are suffering loss. We should ensure that climate finance reaches these devastated communities who are affected by floods and landslides and storms, water scarcity, so that they can rebuild their lives, their children can go to school and they have enough to eat, and they can live a comfortable lives as human beings.
God gave us free will when He created human beings, and if they decide to live a wonderful life in nature, nobody can judge them. We have to help them and just give the resources that they need to live with the basic rights that every single human being on earth needs to be: shelter, eating, breathing, drinking, educated by their kids and their children. And I think that these voices of community, indigenous people, needs to be heard. There has to be like a committee of indigenous people in the COP26, in United Nations. These are the ones that know maybe how we can clean our atmosphere because they know nature. We can go to nature to have tourism, but these indigenous people, they are connected with nature 24 hours in their days and nights. So they are wise in how nature works and connects with human beings. It's not the same when we go for a tourism or for a countryside just to enjoy 3 days of our lives than when we eat from the land, when we have drink from the water, when we have drinking from the rivers, and when we live in trees, in houses made by trees or by bamboos, it's not the same, the wisdom that a human being can have connected to the earth 24 hours than the one that civil, industrialized humans can have. So I think this is a subject of climate justice that it is not yet heard, and it is not yet taken into the serious subjects of the world and the presidents and countries and the legislators, since they don't think that they are have to be heard, that they are like common human beings, and they're more wise than us, because when God created the world, He created first the nature, the plants and the animals, then He created human beings to guardian that earth, not the other way around. So this climate justice for indigenous community must be heard and must be taken in action by all our voices that we are having here, RITURAJ. Like you said, we need legislators and we need political environmental policies that can include these indigenous people and indigenous community as equals, because we are all humans, as you just said, everywhere in the world. So this is very important subject, and I learned a lot today. And I hope that if anybody is listening to us, please just research what RITURAJ said, research about the indigenous communities everywhere, research about this 5% that is taking care of the 70% of the earth that is not damaged yet. They know how to be connected with the earth and the mother nature that we don't, although we think we do. Thank you, RITURAJ, for this voice, for this vote, for this presentation, for Mr. Jadaf Payeng. Tell him that we are so thankful for his connection with us. We are so thankful for being with us today. I am honored by your presence, RITURAJ. May God bless you. May God bless Mr. Jadaf. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for having me here. And I'll just have one sentence. Like Mr. Jadaf said, he only needs to buy matchbox, kerosene, oil, and salt, and the rest they find it in nature. I believe that indigenous peoples and local communities have been sustainable for thousands of years, even before the word sustainable was invented or coined. Therefore, any conversation or any road to achieving the sustainable development goals must include indigenous knowledge, and climate justice has to be part of these conversations. Thank you again for having me here. Of course, thanks to my friend Jadap Payang who joined us here. Thanks to Elsie Gabriel from India for being here with us as well. It's been such an honor to participate in your tables every year.
Thank you, Elsie, for being here with us also. A big clap from here and a big clap for all our comrades here that are doing. All the glory for God for this table. Thank you, God, for this table. It was amazing to learn from you. Thank you, all of you that are watching. I hope you learned something today. I hope you can see what we need in the humanity around us, that we all connect, are connected together. Muchas gracias por seguirnos en la transmisión. Seguimos con la próxima mesa de este segundo triple encuentro histórico del derecho ambiental.